Right, so learning to learn, make your brain work for you. Well, my name's Bowden. I'm a project manager, slightly more BA now, but I was a teacher in my previous life before Headtalks. And when you're a teacher, you learn a load of stuff about learning theory and brains and just stuff. And I thought some of that learning and brains and stuff might be useful for you guys to help you to learn things in a more efficient way. This is the secret. It's not being smarter, it's being better. So first of all, a few disclaimers. I started this presentation yesterday. I didn't manage to finish it last night, and I was finishing it today, and my Mac died. So this is a half-done presentation. First half is nice with pictures and stuff. The second half is just a brain dump of information. So it's going to get a bit off track, but there's a good picture at the end, so it should be okay. So, don't take everything I say as being the absolute truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I can't remember if all of this stuff is fact or whether I just thought it's a really good idea, so don't do that. Also, looking on the internet, some of these dates may not be 100% right. Obviously, if you found part of a jaw from 10,000 years ago, you aren't 100% sure exactly where it came from. So I've done the best I can to try and use reliable sources. Wikipedia is one of those sources that quite a chunk of this information has come from. But I do have other references for bits and bobs to any particular part that I talk about that you find interesting. I'm not going to go into massive detail, but I'll touch on quite a few different things. Good news, you get the full presentation. There's no unlocks required. So, what I'm going to tell you, the whole of human history, just not much, to basically how we got the brain that we've got and how we've used our brain to get what we've got now. And then also how we can then actually make use of that information to make our brain maximize performance. Work with your brain, not against it. It's a secret. So, incoming too lazy didn't read for the whole of human history. So, hominids. We are hominids. Apes first appeared 25 million years ago. The oldest bipedal hominid is 7 million years ago. This helped us evolve into our niche. This is a long story, but I'm condensing it as best I can. So, human walking is it's actually traveling, not necessarily walking. It's 25% more efficient than an average same-sized mammal. So believe it or not, we're designed to travel long distances on foot. And as a result, we travel very, very, very efficiently compared to all other animals. As you can see, there's a grinning project manager there, having just completed the Eden Marathon for fun. So, human v horse. All the great ideas come about from a pub. Gordon Green, 1979, sat in a pub, made a bet. Roughly translated into, I think a human can beat a horse over a marathon. Because it was Wales, they did 22 miles. So obviously, I don't know why that's not actually a marathon, but this is called a marathon. And in 2004 was the first time that actually a human beat a horse. Okay, doesn't sound that particularly exciting, but the next slide will actually give a little bit more information as to why that was more impressive than it sounds. How do we beat a horse? These are typical distances travelled by creatures in a normal day. African hunting dogs travel 10 kilometres a day, wolves 14 kilometres, hyenas 19 kilometres, horses 10 kilometres a day. Humans can do 42 kilometres or a marathon in a few hours. Some of them, insane ones, will do 100 kilometres just for fun. I mean, there's a race I'm sure you've heard of in Cornwall that actually races around the coastal path for 100 miles. Why would we do that for fun? I did put an asterisk in there in case anyone does think about it. Huskies do actually cover 100 kilometres a day in their races that they do up in the Arctic. But that's in Arctic conditions. I'll get into that in a second. We have basically evolved to be hot day meat chasers. That's what our niche is. That's where we fit in the biological kingdom that makes us what we are. That's why we've survived. We had to have something that we did better than anything else, and that's what it is. Why do you think we get a runner's high? It's a thing, it's proven. Your brain actually goes, oh, this is a great thing, beating yourself up by running huge distances. I don't get it, it's made us this way, let's take advantage of this. We've got small guts, small teeth, and big brains. Now, I did have other notes that I'd written on this, but it didn't save, so I'll do my best to remember it. Basically, meat eaters don't mean we have big brains, because the meat, nothing to do with our brains. Fish is an example, I'll come back to that right at the end. But the fact we've had to outsmart things and able to be able to get them and eat them means that our brains have got bigger in order to be able to try and catch something. One of the main methods that we would have used millions of years ago is literally chasing something till it drops dead. And it's true, there's tribes in Africa that will hunt this particular way. I think there's a Planet Earth that they had an episode in it. And literally this tribesman just picked this poor ox or whatever it was and chased it until it dropped dead. And it was a really, really, really powerful to see that actually on a hot day, a big animal cannot cool itself down enough to be able to travel those distances. Whereas us, we haven't got much hair, we're very efficient, some hair more than others. We can perform this, and that's what we did. So, coming back to the huskies, Arctic conditions, they were able to get rid of that huge amount of heat generated from travelling that distance and basically being pushed. I've used forced. I'm not sure how much you can force a husky before it bites your face off. But because it's very, very cold, basically that gave them an advantage that they can travel those sorts of distances within a day without overheating. So, how does it get back to the human versus horse? Well, interestingly, to give you a bit of insight into this, the first 10 years, I believe, the race was actually started by Screaming Lord Sutch. You will all know is the monster raving loony party chairman. Hence to say this wasn't taken very seriously for a considerable amount of time, and some of our most elite athletes have not taken place in this event. But actually in more recent times you'll see that quite a lot of humans have beaten horses. Again, Wales isn't particularly hot, so we're not playing to our strength, and also the distance a horse can cover without too many problems, but it's difficult for humans to compete with a horse over that shorter distance. And that's basically what that has. Interestingly, if you actually looked at the times, there's not a great deal of difference in times between the horse and the human in quite a few of the times that the horse won. So, using brains. Homo habilis, or handy homo. 2.1 million years ago to approximately 1.5 million years ago. That was our first people. We then turned into Homo erectus, i.e. upright, which is our proper standing, fully upright, not sort of doing a walking, hobbling like a chimpanzee type walk, which again isn't terribly efficient. 1.9 million years ago to about 140,000 years ago. Modern humans appeared a little bit before that. Might have had an impact on their demise. Not so cool. First started using stone tools 2.6 million years ago. So that's way before we had these awesome brains we've got now, but back in the day. Rick's day. He's not even here for the joke. Don't worry, I didn't put a missing link one in. Brain encephalization, I think that's the right way of saying it. Basically going from Homo habilis right the way through to Homo sapien, which is the particular species that we all are today. Our brains are 3 times bigger than an equivalent chimp or gorilla. So if you took the same weight, size of a chimp or a gorilla, scaled them up to our size, we've got a 3 times bigger brain than they have. And there's a lot of research that suggests that brain size and intelligence are linked together. Although they're not 100% sure about that because tigers have the biggest brain of any of the big cats, and they're not necessarily sure if they're more intelligent than lions because lions have social aspect, whereas tigers don't. Only found that out today. Our brains grow postnatal. I didn't know this. So after we're born, our brains keep growing. But that doesn't happen with an awful lot of other sapiens, if you like, or other ape-type creatures. Extended periods of social learning, language acquisition, possibly 2 million years ago, and problem solving, those sorts of skills. Again, how on earth can you tell that? That's not something you get from fossil records. This is, you have to look at information and things that you found, wall paintings or parts of butchery on bones and things like that to try and work out if we were being clever about this. So again, not 100% sure of that. It is all linked to an increased meat in the diet. We can actually work that out. And it's a rapid increase in the cerebellum, bit of your brain. Can't remember which bit. I did have a picture, lost it. Which is sensory motor control, learning complex muscular action sequences, doing stuff. Okay? Could be throwing a spear or grinding something up. They're complicated actions to do that through repetition we get very good at them. Why do you think we have an Olympics, for goodness sake? It's basically just Olympics of doing the stuff we used to do. Fire! 1 million years ago-ish. Not 100% sure. With fire came cooking. Excellent news. This gave us a much more efficient way of getting nutrients into our system. If you're eating raw meat, especially, that's very difficult for your body to digest. It takes a lot of calories to get the valuable protein out of that. By cooking it, it breaks it down, it tastes good. Which also helps with supporting big brains. Your brain uses 13 watts or 260 kilocalories a day just resting. So watching telly. Or 20% of your resting energy usage, same sort of scale of things. Average human, that's how much your brain uses, and oxygen is even more than that. Your brain is a tremendously difficult organ to keep alive and to keep going. We're very lucky to have them, we should look after them. We end up with Homo sapien, or wise, that's us that is, by the way. Homo sapien squared. It's actually called Homo sapien sapien, or modern human-like ape. Not entirely sure, I did have some notes, lost them. First appeared 250,000 years ago, or earlier, possibly up to 400,000 years ago. Very difficult to tell. I think many, many years ago they was talking about the footsteps coming out of Africa. There's physically footsteps that have been seen in, I want to say fossilized mud. They look back, that was around 180,000 years ago, so this is actually before that. They know that they were around before that. So, took us to evolve, it's important, from Homo erectus to Homo sapien, i.e. from standing up to big brains, approximately 1.75 million years to reach that point. That's a very, very long time for us to evolve to standing a bit more upright and having better brains. That's it, that's how long it is. We're only 250,000 years into being Homo sapiens. The real key point is we aren't that different to our hot day meat chasers. Sorry, don't mind, that makes me chuckle. 50,000 years ago, our next most important things, we started doing modern human things. We wore animal hides, we buried our dead, we did clever hunting, i.e. trapping pits, chasing stuff off cliffs. We had specialised tools, fishhooks, buttons, needles, jewellery, organisation of living space. Not sure how they found that. Maybe they unlocked a cave and there was like a table and a bed and Sims or something. Rituals, trading. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? 50,000 years ago, we were still trading with each other. The whole globe, nearly, covered in humans by the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago. So basically, we conquered it. The planet was ours. We were everywhere. No other species was doing that because we were adaptable. So, from then till now, domestication, 80,000 years BC, when we did farming. Got the first cities of Jericho and whatever that is, 6,000 years ago BC. Again, I did look up what that was because I've never heard of that before. I lost those notes. Cambrai, 3.7 thousand years BC. Approximately 6,000 years ago, we were living on top of the hill. Haven't moved far, have we? We've invented the wheel, writing, bronze working, sailing boats, pottery wheels, and maths. I was a maths teacher, so that's a thing. What's really important is not everyone had to go out and get food to eat. What that meant was we were living in civilizations. Some people went and got meat, other people didn't have to. And this is where our brains suddenly didn't have to constantly think about what am I going to catch and eat, or where am I going to forage and eat, or where am I going to get my drinking water from, and all these important things. That stuff was starting to be provided for us. And here we are. Hot day meat chasers to present day. Our parents would be so proud. So recap, good at running, big brain, brain tuned to learning, spent a very long time daily catching and eating stuff, brains tuned to learning that stuff. Running, chasing, catching stuff, finding water, remembering where to forage. Most importantly of all, we're amazing at forgetting. What? Hang on a minute, this is about learning. Nope. This is where it's very, very important. Think about all the information we forget in a day. Kind of an oxymoron that. You can't think about it because you forgot about it. What did you eat yesterday? Every single thing? Can you remember it? Maybe. Who's the first person you spoke when you walked into the office today? Did you see any buses on your way to work? How many did you see? We haven't had that information. We can't recall that. We've forgotten it. Think of any adverts we see in a day. All this information is being bombarded into our brains at a ridiculous speed, and we forget a lot. So that's what our brains are awesome at. I said that. So, how is that useful? Short and long-term memory. Everything we see and do and hear and feel goes into a short-term cache, see IT related. Memory, it does get a little bit more related to everyday life in work as opposed to just a history lesson. Typically 10 to 15 seconds retention. You forgot what the last slide was about. And we can only keep 4 to 5 things in our working or short-term memory. I'm terrible at working memory. One of the tricks the kids used to like when I was teaching is if I was writing something on the board, they would shout out words, and the words would appear in what I was writing because I'd forgotten what I was writing about because my memory was that terrible. That's why I've got an interest in this sort of stuff and trying to help with that. So that's that. Long-term memory is the things that you recall from a long time ago. And what I mean by a long time ago, yesterday, weeks, months, years. So, how do we get stuff from short to long-term memory? Our brain's made up of neurons that connect to each other. Our big, massive warning lights on this one. We don't really absolutely know how our brain does this stuff. So there's a little bit of my interpretation on this to make it into a good story. No, sorry, head talk. So these links kind of make up our memories, all these neurons firing and working together. Reusing the links makes them stronger, we know that. Not using the links makes them disappear, i.e. forget or remember. Learning makes our brain actually physically grow. Now, the human brain is pretty much fixed in size, obviously, because we've got a big bony skull outside of it. It can't make it any bigger. But what we can do is increase the surface area. The surface of your brain is actually where all the clever stuff happens, and inside it isn't a great deal of memories, if you like, are stored within inside it. So having a bigger surface area of your brain is actually increasing the thinking part of your brain. So there was research that was done about an orchestra. I forget which orchestra it was, and I don't remember all the details of this. But basically, they scanned their brains and worked out there's a particular part of their brain that was slightly bigger than a normal person. And then took a load of people who were no good at music, and they spent a lot of time intensively teaching them music and various different instruments and things. And they did brain scans on them, and they found that that particular part of the brain had grown from what it was before. This is actually called brain plasticity. It's a really interesting thing we're starting to discover about the human brain. Basically, you're not born with an intelligence. Your intelligence can be changed. That's a really interesting concept to think of. If you work on something, it will get better. Even if it's something you're really bad at, it will get better. Helpful learning thing number 1. Homework makes us remember something soon after we learn it. It doesn't create new links, but it does strengthen the ones we have. This is what's really important and part of my argument about why I don't think homework is necessarily always a good thing. If you don't know it in the first place or have experienced it, you aren't going to be able to remember it. But if you have experienced it deep enough that you can remember it, repeating the same task over again will strengthen those neural pathways and will mean that you will be able to remember it. Think about it, one day you're stumbling along, you discover a really good watering hole. You're going to want to know how to get back there. If you go back there 2 or 3 times, you're going to remember exactly how to get there. 10 years' time, when your watering holes run out, you think, oh, I remember that other one that had something on it. I can go and find it. That's how our memory works. That's how it's designed. Use it. Make use of it that way. So if you really want to remember something, make sure you remember it. Obviously, these are pretty loose rules. But if you can try and remember it at different periods of time, because you're telling your brain, you remember this thing, remember that thing, come on, remember it again, your brain's going to go, all right, I get it, you need it, it's important, I'll make sure it's remembered. I'll just forget about the other stuff you need, like the shopping list. And that's what's important about reusing memories. Now, I've not done a great job when it was one of my jobs to fix about talking about learning, remembering, problem solving. As far as I'm concerned, they're all the same thing. It's all using your brain to do something. And throughout this, they're pretty much interchangeable. Audience participation time. Need a volunteer? Someone with a really bad memory. We're going to make it good. Don't put your hands up at once. Barney, go on then. So, what we're going to demonstrate, and play along at home. I've got a list of 10 things. I'm going to read them out, and Barney's not going to remember them. And most of you aren't going to remember them either. And I'll show you a little trick that hopefully you will then be able to remember them second time round. So, they're a bit random, but that helps with the trick, and it's slightly engineered that way, but they did come from my colleagues in my office. Okay? So don't worry, Barney, you aren't going to remember these. Working memory of 3, remember. Okay, so, cat. Ice cream. Elephant. Wankel rotary engine. Satellite dish. Rabbit poo. Pot plant. Fish. Kazakhstan. Bloomers. Obviously, not the underpants, the bread. Okay, right, Barney, now's your time to shine. How many can you remember?
Right, in the office, with the bread bloomers, looking at a map of Kazakhstan, there's our giant elephant in the corner, with a fish in the tank. There is some rabbits turned on my shoe, which I stood in as I came into the office. There is a Wankel rotary engine. And there is a cat eating an ice cream.
Very, very good. Barney cheated. Thanks, Barney. I said people with a bad memory. Okay. Thank you. Barney has actually beautifully illustrated exactly what I was going to do, which is turn it into a silly story. Okay? So now we've heard that twice. Who thinks they can remember more than 5 things, and I will ask you to say them? Okay? Maybe a couple? Let's pick on Ben. Go on, Ben.
Cat, rabbit food, elephant, Wankel rotary engine, satellite dish, Kazakhstan.
Very, very good. Round of applause. That was 6. Okay, so to illustrate a point, let's make it into a ridiculous story. And what's really interesting is you won't only remember the story virtually word for word, all the associated information as well, not just those original 10 things. Anyone think they can make up a hilarious story? So it's not me cheating. All right, here we go. So I was eating cat-flavoured ice cream, sat on an elephant that was powered by a Wankel rotary engine. Good news though, I had great TV because there was a satellite dish attached to the elephant. And weirdly, rabbit poo coming out of the elephant. I mean, you'd think an elephant would have bigger. But because it had all the mod cons, it actually had a pot plant and a fish tank on its back, which was lovely. We were travelling through Kazakhstan when, unfortunately, some bloomers came flying by. But they weren't the bloomers' pants, they were the bread. Okay, who thinks they can recall that story? Have a think about it for a minute. So this is the chance to show off memory. Who thinks they can remember that as close to word for word as they can? Start with a cat. Anyone? Go on, John.
I was eating cat flavoured ice cream on an elephant, and I watched TV because I had a satellite dish, and for some strange reason it was pooing rabbit poo, and a fish tank, and a potted plant, and we were travelling to Kazakhstan, and this man called rotary engine elephant, and humans were going by, a bit like clouds.
Thanks, John, you saved me. That's just a simple little illustration of actually using your brains how they were meant to be used, i.e. forming the knowledge and hanging knowledge off existing information is a great way of being able to remember a list of things. Not a great thing to remember, but it illustrates the point I'm trying to make. Helpful learning thing 2. If you want to remember a list of things, force the connections in your brain. So make up a silly story, like we've just done. Sorry, should have got rid of that slide. VAK, 3 ways of absorbing information. Visual, i.e. seeing something. Auditory, hearing something. And kinesthetic, which is doing something. So this presentation I've given isn't great, because it only hit visual and auditory. It hasn't done kinesthetic. You haven't physically been doing anything a long time listening to this. We can all learn with all 3 ways, but we'll have a preference for 1 or 2 of them. I myself, a terrible auditory learner. Kinesthetic, drive me along a road, I remember that route forever. So kinesthetic and visual, very, very strong. Auditory, very, very weak. Really, really struggle with languages as a result of this. I can't hear the differences in the language, and I can't remember it. The information doesn't get processed very well. So if I had to learn a different language, I would somehow have to make that visual or kinesthetic to learn it. Again, very difficult to do with a language. That's why I'm not very good at languages. I haven't worked out how to teach myself that in that particular way. So that's something good for you to do if you do need to remember something, and try and do that in 3 different ways. So when you need to remember something, try and use all 3 ways. For example, a mind map. Hits the visual and kinesthetic, which are the most common. Auditory, you could use a dictaphone to speak notes. You can hear them back again, but it's a bit tricky to do that. The next thing I'm going to talk about will actually try and help with all aspects of this, not just auditory. Organising your thoughts into a tree or a map of information is a really good way of analysing what information you've got stored in your brain and how you can get the information out. Like this one. Look at that one. Someone with far more talent than me has created a mind map, and this is a way that they can organise the information. So what they've done here is they've linked to key pieces of information and information underneath that. Okay. What's really important to think about with this is just the creating of it will help you remember it. It doesn't necessarily have to be used afterwards as a technique to be able to remember stuff in the future. Possibly you could do this once and you're good. So next step, proper learning. To really help you understand something, there's a very useful cycle that helps us to get the first learning done. So watch, try, check, think. Watch something done, or listen here. See, try it yourself. Hopefully you get it wrong, because if you get it wrong, after you check that, you can then think about it. If you get it right, you aren't learning. That's when the magic happens, on the getting it wrong and thinking. So every positive, every negative can be a positive. Best stuff. Bloom's Taxonomy. Very, very boring. I'll make a real short version of it. So VAK, doing any of those sorts of things, is the lowest level of understanding you can have. If you use that knowledge, it's better stuck in your brain. If you teach that knowledge to others, it really, really, really gets stuck in your brain. And the final kind of step is evaluating the idea and comparing it to others. Bloom's Taxonomy goes into all sorts of weird bits further down. It doesn't quite work for IT, so I skipped over it. But if you think about this more sort of, BAK would be reading a web page or watching a video or copying example code. Using that knowledge to then apply that to something. For example, writing the code yourself to solve a particular problem. Pairing, but when you're not the expert. You might have a little bit of understanding on it, but someone's going to help you with it. Teaching others, pairing when you are the expert. That's a great way of bringing that knowledge from just something simple you've remembered to really, really understanding it. And then last of all, be evaluating that. So using your new knowledge in a planning session or kind of an architectural level, evaluating that technique compared to a different technique, being able to debate between two different things is like the highest level of understanding you can get of information or knowledge or problem solving. Other things didn't fit on the slides. This is the last one, don't worry. Stress, really, really, really bad. Your spinal column comes up. On top of it, you've got a pit of the brain. I'd written it down, I can't remember what it's called. That's the reptilian brain. That's fight or flight. All the information coming into your brain has to pass through this. Am I going to die? If you think you're going to die, it's not going to let it go to the rest of your brain, all those really powerful, clever bits. If you're really, really stressed out, it's not going to get past that. You won't be able to think about things. Darren Brown does this with the stuff that he does when he gets someone to forget what tube station they're going to. Puts a huge amount of pressure on them. That reptilian brain goes, nope, I'm not going to use that clever information that's up there. I'm going to stop it here. Am I going to run or am I going to fight? And that's all you can think about at that particular point. Thinking time. Everyone needs thinking time. Up to 60 seconds to process the information, provide a solution. Really important, people think at different speeds. Nothing to do with intelligence. If you're doing a planning session, you've got 3 or 4 good ideas, there'll be one person, really quick thinking, loads and loads of ideas fired out. They're going to be coming up with new ideas before the first person who's slower getting a response has had time to think about the first thing. It's worth slowing down these sorts of discussions so that everyone can run at the same speed and apply the same amount. Nothing to do with intelligence. Drawing diagrams massively helps with understanding. It doesn't matter how simple it is. If you can draw a diagram about it, it then hits that visual, auditory, kinesthetic. You're talking about it, you're visually drawing it, but also kinesthetically, you're probably drawing some arrows and that sort of stuff. It links all together lovely. You can get clever with practice. Fish oils make your brain work better. That is a known thing. Brain, synapses, bits like this talk to each other. This bit is predominantly made with fish oil. Your body can't make it itself. If you're not getting fish oils, those messages going from this neuron to this neuron don't pass through correctly. So if you feel that suddenly, I can't remember things as well as I did last week, like this struggling to get words, fish oil tablets, I promise you in a week it's better. It's a bit weird, but that's pretty much how it works. So recap, we spent hundreds of thousands of years, cavemen, cave women, don't fight, take advantage of it. Memory, linking to existing knowledge, input, info, VAK, try and use a few of them. Better understanding comes from teaching others. Education is important, but biceps are better. Thank you very much. I'm done. Any questions?
I read somewhere that retention has a lot to do with intention. How can we reinforce that intention? How can we make it strong enough as to retain information?
I'm guessing a lot of that's thinking about whether you care about that information or not. If someone gives me information I don't particularly care about, it's not going to stay in there. It's as simple as that. There has to be some way of making someone care about it. It could be through applying pressure, although, again, that's very quickly heads into not understanding it properly. Possibly change the context so that it's in a slightly different way that they might care about it. It depend on the case. But yeah, that's an important thing. Dan?
So, forgetting is important. What about people with photographic memories? Are they better learners or worse learners because they've got loads of random crap?
Well, I think photographic memories are a really interesting one. All of our brains are wired up differently. Photographic memory would mean that your brain's really good in a particular way, but not necessarily in another way. There is some research that photographic memory might not actually be a thing. People might be better about it because some of the smaller details in that photograph isn't always necessarily absorbed. And also they would probably have weaknesses in other areas. So they probably really focused on making their brain really good at that particular thing and not necessarily good at other things. Also, I guess that they probably remember all those photos quite quickly. Is that? If you're not getting omega-3 and omega-6, your body synthesizes something that isn't as good. So it's not necessarily not working, but it could be better. Okay? That's nothing against anyone who's vegan or vegetarian. You know, feel free to do that. A lot of people do still eat fish, and it's the oily fish that they need. Maybe. I'm going to go because I've talked too much. I've done a Toby filibuster. Make yourself Mike's long.